So typically this is the way, I sort of see organizations work with this product design and engineering, and there's a wall in between. So I want you to think about these lines here, because these lines, may be porous. There may be some good times when, things are working in between. But these are your handoff points, right? And a lot of times these handoff points, are some kind of documents or things like that. But these walls are really important. And so as the way I'm talking about it today is based on especially my Silicon Valley and some of my experiences back at Sabre and such in Dallas. So you may have some different words for this, and happy to have you shout them out too. But product or product managers, business analysts, these sort of things. Business analyst sometimes runs kind of a mixed role, but we usually call them product managers. They're the product owner. They're responsible for the feature definition, for getting customer requirements. They're responsible, a lot of times for the bottom line of the product itself. Sometimes that business, sometimes the business budget is not part of their thing, but sometimes it is. They don't do design. They excuse me. They should drive by hypothesis, and we'll talk about hypothesis-driven, product in a little bit too. And they typically produce a PRD, product requirements document. What do you guys call it? Is that usually called a PRD? Spec or any special names? Huh? Was it?
CPS reports.
What is it? CPS report. There you go. And then design, and then these are, I'm breaking these functions out separately. And one of the things I want to hear in a minute is, do you guys kind of see it falling pretty crisply in these specializations, or is there a big mix in your organization? Design, user experience design, user experience, interaction design, information architecture, visual design, content, we just call it a designer. Sometimes they're called a web developer who's really a designer but does a little HTML, CSS. It's all over the board in our industry, these titles. But generally when I talk about designers, I'm talking about a person who's not responsible for engineering the experience, but designing the experience. And I realize that in some of your organizations, a designer may be both of those things. Typically, they consume the PRD and they produce design spec. It's even worse at PayPal, and we changed this. But it was that product would create the product requirements document, the PRD. They would hand it off to the PMO, the project management office. And this is a whole bunch of project managers, right? Do you guys have project managers? Do you like project managers? Is there a project manager in here you are afraid to say it? Are project managers helpful in your team? Raise your hand. Okay, good. And are they not helpful? So it's a mix. It's going to totally depend on the project manager, right? If you get a bad project manager, it sucks, man. It's like micromanagement. We had this one project many years ago at American Airlines that was getting behind, and our project manager came and said, okay, we're going to have hourly meetings until we get back on schedule. I'm like, dude, how in the world? I said, I'm not coming. You can meet by yourself and have fun, So, so that's the example of bad. So a whole project management office would get the PRD, right? And then they would ask engineering, give me back dev days, developer days. That'll be 2,500 days. That'll be 2,000 days. It'll be 200 days. Be whatever. And so then it would get turned over to design. You love that? It seems a little odd, does it? And then design would get it, and then design would go off and create their Picassos in Photoshop, and then throw it over the wall to engineering. You're just going to go, what the, and they got it. And so you can see why experiences were getting screwed up, and it was impossible to get anything done. So that's when I'm talking about design. I'm talking about these folks. And then engineering, I'm thinking really more front-end engineering. There's a whole engineering complement that goes deeper in the stack. User interface engineer is what I call them at PayPal. I actually changed the name from, we were called web devs at PayPal, but I'd called it user interface engineering at Netflix. And Netflix, when I got there, the engineers were called production engineers. And I hated that. It's like, So all we do is like, we're just like reactionary, we just do production stuff. We don't actually think, we're just like, web monkeys or what, And so, I mean, they brought me in because they really, Netflix had a strong ethos about design and a strong, sense about engineering, and they wanted to really up the talent, for our front-end engineering. And so we changed it to user interface engineering. When I got to PayPal, the thing I realized was the web dev community there was second-class citizen, total second-class citizen. Does that happen at your organizations where web developers are kind of felt treated? Okay, got some nods, good, yeah. And the first thing I go to work at in any organization is just completely turning that myth upside down, because to be a really good front-end engineer, user interface engineer, there are so many areas you have to be good at. Not only the engineering, and especially there's all the computer science skills, there's everything else, but there's people skills, social skills, everything else. To me, it's a full complement engineer. It's a true engineer. And I actually kind of look down on the other engineers. So I give it back to them in smack, right? And I've done the other engineering, so I know what it's like. I've written algorithms, I've written the low-level stuff and all that. So I understand it, and I get the challenge, and I do respect it greatly, scale and everything else. But there it was like, you're a dev or you're a web dev. It's kind of like the step down. So a name maybe doesn't mean too much, but it does send a message. So we changed that to user interface engineering. But more importantly, we brought in great talent, and we started doing things differently. And now we've had the back-end engineering teams come and say, wow, your team's really awesome, and they've taught us a lot. And so we're changing the whole story of what user interface engineering is. And I just wanted to stop for a moment and say, you need to really embrace that yourself. Don't ever take that you're a second-class citizen. I mean, we bring design to life. Design does not get to life without us. We're the life part. And what the customer touches, the bits that the customer touches, is what we own. And to me, that is a huge thing. That is in our space, is just gigantic. So very, very important. So this is usually what happens with the added thing that at PayPal we have that additional PMO office to get in the middle of it to make it a mess. And then what would happen is, because it was so hard to get these resources together, and this is again what you were talking about with the project focus, right? You get the teams all together, you get this project, you go for it, and the whole focus is get the thing out the door, meet the timeline, meet the deadline. And then when you meet the deadline, the team gets disbanded, or at least some parts of it, and they go do something else. Now, what does this do to the psychology of a team? What does it do to a product manager? He doesn't own the resources, right? Or she doesn't own the resources. They have them for a period of time. If you have them for a period of time, what's that going to do to your feature set? You're going to try to cram as many features as possible into that short amount of time as you can, because once that team kind of goes away, you may not get another chance till next year to do this, right? And so it becomes this game of, and then it becomes a game of trying to keep resources, and pad schedules and stuff like that. When you actually have launched that feature or that product, that's not the end, that's only the beginning. But the psychology at PayPal has been, that was the conclusion, that was the finish line. You got your bonuses based on that. Product managers got their bonuses, everybody got their kudos, the firefighting, you saved the day, you launched the product, you met the timeline, you're an awesome person. Did the customer, did the user have a better experience? Well, we don't know that. I mean, we met the timeline, right? These are called vanity metrics. And one of the principles, you read Eric Ries's book, Lean Startup, he really attacks vanity metrics. And most of your organizations, I guarantee, have vanity metrics all the way through it, because we want to self-congratulate ourselves. But if we can ever get to the point where we're not about delivering product, but we're about delivering experience, and we're about build, test, and learn, to where we put something out and we get the feedback loops, and before we put it out, we're getting feedback loops all the way around with customers, then it changes the focus of a team. And we'll talk a lot about that today. So what's wrong? This is kind of obvious. We work in isolated phases. Process and documentation really are just kind of the Band-Aids to kind of piece this together. and we focus on the delivery instead of continuously improving the experience. And I want to emphasize that, continuously improving the experience.